Hello everyone, it's Dr. T. I'm a tech trainer and career coach, and I help professionals transition to tech by leveraging their existing skills and abilities. Today, we're talking about PCI DSS compliance. PCI DSS stands for Pay Card Industry Data Security Standard. It's a part of a compliance program focused on ensuring that all companies that accept, process, store, or transmit credit card information maintain a secure environment. PCI DSS was established by the Pay Card Industry Security Standards Council. That's PCI SSC, and members of this council include the major credit card companies such as MasterCard, Visa, American Express, Discover, and JCB. In this video, we're talking about so there are 12 requirements related to PCI DSS compliance, and there are 6 categories that the requirements are kind of bundled into. There's building and maintaining a secure network and system, protecting cardholder data, maintaining a vulnerability management program, implementing strong access controls, regularly monitoring and testing networks, and maintaining information security policies. This video focuses on maintaining a vulnerability management program. And vulnerability management protects against exploits, so malware exploits or weaknesses in antivirus software, and then keeping logs around these weaknesses and exploits, and implementing a risk-based approach to managing the vulnerabilities. So if we think about vulnerability management from a PCI DSS perspective, there are 2 requirements that 2 of the 12 PCI DSS requirements map to vulnerability management. There's requirement 5 and requirement 6. So requirement 5 focuses on protecting systems from malicious software. With this requirement, organizations seeking compliance have processes in place for protecting against malware. Those processes are clearly defined, and the stakeholders impacted by these processes are fully informed on the process and their role within the process. Malicious software is detected by the organization, prevented, and addressed. There's anti-malware mechanisms in place, and those mechanisms are actively monitored, and there are anti-phishing mechanisms in place. So protecting the users against email scams that include some component of malware. Requirement 6 focuses on developing and maintaining secure systems and software. So with this requirement, processes need to be in place regarding developing secure systems. So you have that approach to custom software where it's developed security. So you'll have a secure software development lifecycle identified. You'll have vulnerabilities quickly identified and addressed within software, and you'll have public-facing web apps safeguarded against attacks, and then any changes to apps and software are managed securely. So those are requirements 5 and 6. Let's look at some ways to implement a baseline. Let's look at a baseline for managing the vulnerabilities. So first thing, we need to identify the vulnerabilities. So an organization would be focused on using an automated tool to scan the network regularly and its systems and applications for weaknesses. They would cover both internal and external resources, and the scans would be performed regularly, quarterly, In many instances, they can be done manually as well, where there's an assessment done. There could be penetration testing that would complement any automated scans, and then those identified vulnerabilities would be addressed, and vendor supplied security advisories would be addressed and pulled into to a plan to just maintain that threat intelligence and then have that active plan to mitigate any of these vulnerabilities. Once the vulnerabilities are identified, then the assessment comes into place where they're prioritized, and you want to have the right set of resources, automated or human resources, focused on those most risk-based, implementing a risk-based approach to managing the vulnerabilities. So you want to address things like severity of the vulnerability, the potential impact on the cardholder data security, and then the exploitability of that particular vulnerability. And you'd want to focus on those and prioritize those vulnerabilities first. Classifying the vulnerability in terms of the level of risk and likelihood is a part of that vulnerability assessment, and then determining the scope of the vulnerability and the potential impact on your environment. So having that fully fleshed out ability to assess the risk of these vulnerabilities and then mitigating them based on that risk-based approach. Having remediation plans in place, so a formal process for remediating the vulnerabilities should be identified and able to be implemented promptly. And then having the right people assigned for their particular remediation task, and then certainly having the right skill set in place from team perspective or the individual perspective to address the vulnerability. You want to also have as a focus in managing vulnerabilities a timeline for patching critical and high risk vulnerabilities. We talked about the assessment approach. So you've assessed the risk. Now you need to have a timeline for actually meeting that vulnerability and closing out that gap and closing out that weakness in your system. And then immediately patching may not be feasible. So having an understanding of some compensating controls or workarounds in place that could help in the interim for that unpatched vulnerability. So really having a full-fledged remediation plan where you also monitor the progress of those remediation efforts is important to managing vulnerabilities. Then you'll focus from an organizational perspective on testing and validating these remediations. After you apply the patches, you conduct that validation test to ensure that the vulnerabilities have been effectively addressed. Performing any follow-up scans and testing, all with the focus on successfully closing out that vulnerability as it relates to cardholder data and the cardholder data environment. Of course, documenting and reporting the outputs of the scans, those assessments, and those remediation activities, and then making certain that you generate regular reports summarizing the status of any identified vulnerabilities and your remediation progress ongoing. Lastly, continuous improvement focuses on ongoing monitoring. So in order to effectively manage those vulnerabilities, you need to have a plan in place to monitor the processes that were in place before or newly implemented in order to address the vulnerabilities that were found, and then staying aware of emerging threats and any security advisories that are out, and also remaining informed about any vulnerability disclosures that are relevant to the particular organization's cardholder environment. Taking all of this information from the identified vulnerabilities, the assessments, the remediation, testing results, and those reports, and then using that to regularly incorporate new tools and new techniques for best managing vulnerabilities to cardholder data and cardholder environments. Now, by following these steps and implementing such a comprehensive program, the organization could effectively meet those PCI requirements as it relates to vulnerability management and just overall enhancing the security of their pay card environment. If there's any other suggestions or any questions based on the information presented, don't forget to comment. And thanks for sharing, liking, and subscribing.